So today we're going to talk about health and stress. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to be over there because it's not a clicker thing. So we're going to go through the notes very quickly because it's very self-explanatory in my opinion, and I think it will be in yours too. So the first thing we talk about are sources of stress, and one source of stress is a catastrophe or a severe stressor that a person might go through. Usually when people go through severe stressors or catastrophes, it tends to put them in emotional shock, and they will tend to be quite suggestible, and you can tell them do this or do that or whatever, and they will. They also need to retell the story over and over, and they usually will end up with some problems with sleep and feelings of guilt, anger, sadness, denial, all are likely. Now, some people, when they go through a severe stressor or a catastrophic event, they go on to develop post-traumatic stress disorder. And post-traumatic stress disorder then becomes, in and of itself, a source of stress. And when this is what we used to call battle fatigue, and then we called it shell shock, and eventually we called it post-traumatic stress disorder. And of course, we now know that this happens with all kinds of stressors that you go through, and is not limited to war as we once thought. So the symptoms are that people may have flashbacks where they have a very powerful memory and may even feel like they are back in that situation. Other times, however, their memories are blocked, and there's entire pieces of things they can't remember, assumingly because it's too traumatic. They experience a high level of anxiety. They tend to have nightmares or other sleep disturbances. They experience feelings of guilt, whether they are actually guilty of anything or not. They experience intrusive memories, where they have memories that get in the way of their daily life. They have hypervigilance, which is being hyper aware, especially of their surroundings and so forth. They feel sometimes, like I said, like they're reliving the traumatic event, and they may experience certainly depression and anxiety. They also have trouble concentrating and a sense that the future is not forever, okay? A foreshortened future. And also estrangement, which is a detachment from their loved ones. So they also may have symptoms of grief, avoidance of traumatic memories, something called survivor guilt, which is feeling guilty that you survived when others did not, but it's also feeling guilty that really bad things happen to other people and not you. It doesn't have to be dying or not, okay? We often see these people try to self-medicate with alcohol and drugs. They may have difficulty with those close relationships, like I told you, startling to sounds that are similar to the one during the trauma. So this is a source of stress that comes from some sort of catastrophe or major stressor. Another source of stress are major life events. Major life events are things that happen to most of us, or many of us, I should say, at one time or another. So we get married, we have babies, we get engaged before we get married, we get a new job, we get a promotion, we retire, we lose a loved one, we go on vacation, we get a traffic ticket. Some of us may go to jail, right? Some of us may take on a mortgage and buy a home, okay? We add a new family member to our home for some reason. These are all major life events, and as you can see, some of them are positive and some of them are negative. And what the Holmes and Ray did, they came in and they made a list of all of these events that they considered major life events. And they assigned each of these events a life change unit, which is a number of points that is representative of how much stress that event would cause. And so the first of these was the death of a spouse. and they gave that 100 points. And then the second one was divorce, and they gave that 99 points. And so what they did is they would have people check off how many of those events have happened to you in the past year. So if you killed off 2 spouses, that's 200 points, right? And so forth. You add them all up, and this number is interesting and important because the higher your score is on that scale, the more likely you are to be currently ill or to become ill soon thereafter. Okay? So those are major life events. Another source of stress are chronic stressors, things that we live with over a long period of time. Being handicapped, being in poverty, being long-term unemployed, being in a bad marriage, being in a poor working conditions or an intolerable political climate, overcrowding, noise pollution, being discriminated against, all of that stuff. Okay, so chronic stressors can definitely add up to a lot of stress. Another type of stressor is called a hassle. A hassle is a little petty annoyance that happens to me or to anyone during the day. Okay, it happens to me a lot. I had a really hassle-filled morning today because my dog was sick to their stomach, and I was just getting ready to leave, and I see that it's all over the place. So I had to clean up all that, and then my dog needed cleaning too. And so I'm trying to get out of the house. I had to get here early, and that wasn't early, was just not happening. Okay. So anyway, those are little hassles. We're running late. We spilled coffee on ourselves. Our car tire is maybe not a flat. A flat is a hassle, but maybe it's just running low, and so we're worried about it the whole time, but we got to get to work and things like that. And the opposite of a hassle is an uplift. So an uplift is a little pleasant, satisfying thing that happens to you. You finish a project. Those of you who are turning in your papers today are going to feel the relief. That's an uplift, right? Of getting that out of the way. So getting a good night's sleep, just things going your way. Finding money. I found $100 recently, so that was a good day. But it's interesting because finding $100 is cool. It's the second time I've found $100. Okay, the last 2 times I've found money, they've been $100. So I'm getting taken care of well by the universe. But anyway, so the interesting thing about these uplifts is that they don't buffer stress. So a little good thing that happens in your life doesn't outweigh the stress and help it much. So a hassle, Lazarus, the guy who studied them, he felt like these could add up to more stress than even major life events. And it turns out that hassles are actually a better predictor of your health than major life events are. So if I had to predict what your health is like right now, and I was either going to get to know what are your major life events that are going on in your life right now, like, you're planning a wedding and you're moving houses or house hunting or whatever, all of these different things, changing jobs, whatever. Or if I knew little hassles, what do you deal with on the daily, right? I would be better able to predict your health by knowing those little daily hassles that you have. Now, of course, what is a hassle or an uplift to one person can be different for another person. So I don't like having a lot to do. If I have 2 things to do, I have 1 too many things to do, okay? And other people really thrive on having a lot going on. So there is a relationship between hassles or daily stress, whatever you want to call it, and health problems like sore throats, getting the flu, getting a cold, having a headache, getting a backache, things like that. But people vary so much in how stress affects them and what things they consider hassles and what they don't. Frustration is another source of stress, a blocked goal, something you're going for and somehow over and over, especially if it's repeatedly, you can't get to that goal met. And then there's choices. Choices are stressful as well. And we're going to divide the choices that you have into 3 options. The first is an approach conflict or choice. In an approach choice, what you have is a situation where you have 2 things to choose from, and those 2 things are equally desirable. So you have to choose between 2 because they're mutually exclusive, but you want them both. You can't have them both, but you want them both. And that presents the stress of which should I choose. Another type of choice is an avoid choice. This is where you have to make a choice, and both options are undesirable. You don't want either one. And so as a result, you experience stress from how will I have to choose, but I don't like either of my choices. And then finally, there's approach avoid. In approach avoid, what happens is that you have to choose one thing, but that thing has both positive and negative aspects to it, okay? So for example, let's say your dream job is to be an illustrator for Disney, okay? Or Pixar. Sounds pretty cool, right? If you're an illustrator, that would be a pretty damn good job. Now, if that was your dream job, okay, don't worry about that. Then let's say that you were offered your dream job, but now you have to take a $20,000 pay cut from your current job to take this dream job. You see, this is a situation where one choice has both good and bad. You want the job, but you want to avoid the $20,000 pay cut. Okay? So that's an example of an approach avoid choice. All right, so we already talked about measuring stress, the Holmes and Ray Social Readjustment Scale. It has now been updated. For example, in the original one, you had to certain things were listed, like, for example, the birth of a child. Things that were not listed in the first one would be things like having difficulty getting pregnant, or a miscarriage. In the first one, the options were death of a spouse or death of a family member. And that's very different because something is really missing there, which I know all too well now, which is the death of a child. That is not the same as just any old family member dying, okay? So there's differences that we're missing and now been corrected for the most part, but it's not a complete list of stressors. Now there's a thing called the College Life Stress Inventory, a similar instrument, and another one called the CUSS, C-U-S-S, which is the College Undergraduate Stress Scale. And you can look those up online, but the college ones for you may not work because they are geared towards traditional students that are not in a commuter school, people who would either be in a dorm or in a roommate, with a roommate in an apartment, stuff like that, okay? So you may find some of those items do not pertain to you. All right, theories of stress. So the first theory we're going to talk about is a theory called general adaptation theory. And Hans Selye came up with this theory, and in fact, it's also more commonly called general adaptation syndrome, because according to this theory, we go through these responses, bodily, physical responses that we make, depending on the intensity of a stressor. So according to this theory, the intensity of a stressor determines our reaction to that stressor. And we respond to stress in 3 distinct stages. The first stage is when our body goes into the alarm mode. It's like the fight or flight response. So we activate that sympathetic nervous system, and we are alert and ready to deal with the stressor, but our bodies are not particularly resistant to stress. And then eventually the alarm subsides. And at this point, we are in the resistance stage, and we are most able to deal with the stressor without physical harm. So we are least likely to get ill here. But if the stressor continues, the body will eventually go into exhaustion. It will not be able to re-alarm itself. And so now you are in a stage where you are most likely to get ill. You are the least resistant to stress. Another theory is Lazarus's cognitive appraisal theory. Cognitive appraisal theory says that it's not a stressor or its intensity that determines our reaction to that stressor, but instead it is our perception of that stressor. Appraisal means that you judge something and determine how important it is, right, or how much it's worth or whatever. So basically, the cognitive appraisal theory is saying we stress out not because we lost our job or because we have to make an important life decision or something like that. We stress out because we ask ourselves these questions, and once we appraise the stressor by asking ourselves these questions, depending on how we answer, we will either become more or less stressed. So the first thing you ask yourself is, what harm or loss have I already experienced? Well, if I've been fired, for example, then obviously it's a blow to my ego. And I've lost maybe my sense of who I am based on that job. I may also have lost some real things, like clients I had that I can't take with me, or work that I did for that company that now becomes the property of that company. Then I ask myself, what threat or further harm or loss do I face? And here you may start asking yourself, how am I going to pay my bills, right? And then lastly, and most importantly, you're going to ask yourself, what kind of challenge does this present? Okay, can I deal with this stressor? So if you lose your job and you tell yourself that, oh my gosh, I'm never going to find that good of a job, or I'm worried about that my skills are up to date, or you might experience a lot of stress. On the other hand, if you're like, no problem, I can get this, I got this, right? I'm going to get a better job. Then you're not going to experience nearly the amount of stress because of how you answered these questions. Okay, another theory of stress, it's not really a theory, but it's something I want to make you aware of, is called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is not discussed in this chapter, but it probably is discussed in the textbook, probably under the heading of motivation. So you can look it up in your index, and you can certainly look it up online. Cognitive dissonance refers to a psychological distress or discomfort that we feel, which is what dissonance is like the opposite of harmony, right? So it's when we're not at harmony or at peace with ourselves. And the reason is that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors don't match. So in order for us to feel comfortable, our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors need to match. If we do something that changes one of those, there are many examples, but unfortunately today we're running low on time. But let's say you go out and you tell all your friends at work that you are going to go buy yourself a Porsche. Okay, you're going to buy yourself a Porsche this weekend, and you're so excited, and your friends are like, "Cool, that's good for you. I'm happy." And then you come back Monday, and they're all like, "Okay, let's see this Porsche." And you go, "Well, I didn't get a Porsche, but I got a smart car." Okay, and what you do is you tell them, "I got this smart car. It's going to be great. I saved a lot of money. It's going to save me bunches on insurance. It's safe. I'm going to, help the environment. It's a green kind of thing as well," and so forth. And so what you're doing is you're justifying things to yourself because your thoughts and feelings and behaviors didn't match. So your thought was, I'm going to buy me a Ferrari, a Porsche, or whatever I said, and your feelings were that that's what you wanted. But your behavior was that they laughed you out of the dealership, right? So you figured out, I can't buy a Porsche. So instead, since you can't do what you want to do, you change your thoughts and feelings to match your behavior. You see what I mean? You change your thoughts and feelings so that they match your behavior. Everything has to match. Now you could change, in another situation, you might be able to change your behavior to your thoughts and feelings, okay? Like, let's say you told somebody you'd help them move, but really you didn't want to help them move, and somebody calls you out and says, why are you helping them move? You don't even like them. And instead of changing your thoughts and feelings, you could, and just say, oh, they're okay, and I'm going to help them, but you could also change your behavior and say, no, I can't help you now, right? So we change these three so they stay matching. Diathesis stress or vulnerability stress is another thing that's related. It's not quite a model of stress, but it's related to stress. And this just says that our bodies are like a chain. And when you stress them, when you pull on a chain, it's going to give at its weakest link, right? That's where it's going to break. So what this theory says is that when we're stressed, our weakest body organ is the one that's going to experience the health problem from the stress. So how do you get these weak systems? You could have a genetic predisposition towards depression or schizophrenia or migraines. Or you could have contracted H. pylori, a bacteria that's in your stomach and will cause ulcers if it grows too much, if your immune system doesn't fight it off. Or maybe you hurt your back in a car accident. Now every time you're stressed, your back hurts. So you can get it from different things. You can contract it, this problem, or you can have had some sort of injury, or it can be a genetic weakness. All right, so physical reactions to stress. We spoke about this last time. The autonomic nervous system is divided into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The parasympathetic is going during low stress conditions. It's conserving energy. It lowers your heart rate and blood pressure. It promotes digestion. It has essential functionings going. Of course, you have to breathe and have a heartbeat, but non-essential functions as well, like fighting off illness and repairing cells and things like that. The sympathetic is the one that comes on when you're in a crisis. It has sympathy for you in a crisis. And this basically is where you start the fight or flight response. So in the fight or flight response, your heart rate and blood pressure are going to be increased, your breathing will be increased, and so will your muscle tension. And what's going to happen is basically you're exerting a lot of energy. And the release of stress hormones like epinephrine and adrenaline, cortisol, all of these are released into the bloodstream, as well as fats and glucose being released into the bloodstream for the purpose of energy. And basically all of the things that are non-essential, like your digestion, fighting off illness, and repairing cells, are going to be put on hold. And so what happens is that this was a great mechanism to have when we first, were on Earth, okay? And when we really did have to, on the daily, need that energy to even, find food and stuff like that, right? But it's kind of left over now, and we don't usually need this kind of energy now to go about our lives. So what we found, this area of psychology and medicine called psychoneuroimmunology. Psychoneuroimmunology. What they do is they study the effects of the stress in the immune system. And they have consistently found that the sympathetic nervous system is linked to all parts of the immune system, okay? So physical changes that are caused by stress weaken the immune system. And the changes in the immune system are due to because of these high stress hormones. And what they do exactly is they turn things off that are not necessary for the moment, which means turning off things like fighting off illness and repairing cells. And if it continues over a long period of time, or is constantly repeated every day, you go through these stressors and you have this reaction, which you don't need anymore. You don't need to respond that physically to stress anymore. Then you have a problem, and this becomes a health issue.
Is that similar to what happens to the body during fight or flight?
It is fight or flight. That's exactly fight or flight. Okay, so we're going to talk about stress and various illnesses, starting with cancer. Now, when I was in school, in undergrad and grad school, I was told that cancer was something that people got in part because they kept all of their emotions inside, which is a real problem because it's blaming the victim, okay? And so even when I started teaching, I heard from students that their family members had cancer and the doctors told them that, like blaming it on them for not getting things off their chest. So we now know that cancer is a combination of your inherited predispositions as well as environmental factors. So if you have an inherited disposition, that's your diathesis stress thing, right? And then you add the stress of certain life factors, like not exercising or eating right or smoking and things like that, then you add the possibility of this, of actually developing the cancer. We do know that stress reduces the number of killer cells in the immune system. And a lady named Castleth did a meta-analysis on the evidence for emotional repression and cancer, and found that there's no link at all between holding things in and getting cancer, okay? It doesn't make your cancer occur in the first place, and it doesn't make it grow any faster when you have that personality type. But we do know that people who get cancer are much more likely to have suffered a loss in the last 2 years than anyone who does not have cancer. So loss, it depresses us. It weakens our immune system, like depression does. And then what will happen is that you will not be fighting off those cancers like you should. We all have cancer in us every day, and our bodies naturally fight them off. So cancer is just cells that have gone rogue, okay? So even though we know that there's no direct link between holding things in and developing cancer, we do know that getting things off your chest can be better for your immune system, okay? So this researcher named Pinbaker, he did a study over at UT. Well, he was at SMU. I think he did it after when he went to UT, but now he's at UT. And basically what he did is he asked for volunteers, anybody who's had a trauma that they never shared with anyone, okay? So when he had his volunteers, then he separated them, of course, at random into 2 groups, the experimental and the control group. And everybody, regardless of what group they were in, came in 3 times a week, and for I can't remember how many weeks, I think it was just a couple, and they wrote for 20 minutes at a time. Now the people in the experimental group, they actually wrote about that trauma that they never told anyone about. But the people in the control group, they wrote about stuff that had nothing to do with anything, like what's in your closet at home. Like describe the items in your closet, okay? Now, the interesting thing about this study is that he used a very hard, evidenced, dependent variable, okay? So instead of using how do you feel now or something kind of wishy-washy, right? He actually went in and did a blood test before they started writing and then after they'd been writing for as many times as they wrote, okay? And this blood test was measuring how much Epstein-Barr virus was in the blood. So Epstein-Barr is a virus that almost all of us have in our bodies. We've come in contact with this virus, and it lives in our body. But what happens is that our immune systems naturally fight it off pretty easily. If it doesn't, you would have things like fatigue and unexplained fevers and things like that, okay? So anyway, what he did was he took this measuring and he took it after they'd written, and he found that the people who wrote about their trauma experienced a significant decrease in the amount of Epstein-Barr virus in the blood as compared to the people who wrote about what's in their closets at home. They did not see that drop in the virus. So obviously, writing about the trauma appears to have been what caused the Epstein-Barr virus to decrease, okay? So we have that evidence.
So talking about your trauma is actually physically healthy and good for you?
Yes, talking about things is physically, that's writing about it. He actually later did another study to see if putting it on a tape recorder was helpful, and he found it's actually more helpful.
Oh, wow.
Because think about it, you can say a lot more, let's say in 10 minutes, than you can write, first of all. Secondly, when you're saying things, it's easy to let out your emotion, right? But when you're writing, it's not so easy. So I think that's just my thoughts, but I think that's probably why. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is heart disease. And this begins with a story of a couple of cardiologists who, back in the 50s, they had their chairs reupholstered in their waiting room. So back before IKEA, right, it was, or IKEA in the States anyway, when you had a big, nice chair, it was a lot cheaper to have it reupholstered than to actually buy a new chair. So we hardly do that anymore because it's so expensive to reupholster as opposed to buying a new chair. But when the upholsterer came, he finished the work, and then he asked them, what kind of doctors are you? And they said, we're cardiologists, heart doctors. And the guy's like, I've never seen chairs worn out like the ones that are in your office. He said the back of the seat was completely new. The fabric was untouched. And he said what's even weirder is that on the seat, only the very front was worn and needed replacing. The back of that seat, that same piece of cloth, on the back side was still very good. So he said, it's like your patients are literally sitting on the edge of their seats. So the patients are sitting like this. I'm trying not to fall down, this is a rolling chair. Okay, so they're sitting like this on the edge of their seats. Now when you sit on the edge of your seat, if you're not from America, you may not be familiar with that saying. But sitting on the edge of your seat means you're ready, right? You're ready to go, you're anxious, you're expecting something. So it's a certain way of being. So when they said, the upholsterer said that to these doctors, they thought, hey, let's do some research, and maybe what we're going to find is that people who get heart disease are a different kind of person. They have a different personality than most people. So they set out to do research, and they found that some people that could definitely fit into one of the two types that they made. So they made what's called type A and type B. That's what they called them, okay? Now type A people are the ones who are more likely to get heart disease. And not everybody's a type A, and not everybody specifically fits into A or B. But type A is hostile, impatient, mistrusting, cynical, ambitious, very competitive. They work hard, they play hard. They're always in a hurry, they're on edge, and they're preoccupied with their responsibilities. As opposed to B, which are way more relaxed and easygoing. Now some people are in between, okay? So over time, they started to do research, and they found that sure enough, type A's were much more likely to have heart disease than type B's, okay? But then as time went by, and we've been doing research on this for almost 30 years, or 20, 25 years, we started realizing, you know what? We do all this research on type A's, and sometimes those type A's have heart attacks and get heart disease, and sometimes, even though they're type A, they do not. So now they set out to find, so what is it exactly about type A that leads to heart disease, right? Or that's correlated with heart disease, I should say. And what they found is that the primary component that seems to determine how the likelihood of a of a type A to have heart disease is hostility. Being like not just hostile, but suspicious and argumentative and having a very negative attitude and being very competitive. So that it's a, what's the word? Suspicious type of hostility, okay? So if you don't know if you're hostile, I'm gonna ask you a question and and then you just answer for yourself where you're at with this, okay? So how you know you're hostile is if you frequently feel like you're surrounded by idiots. That's how you know, okay? So some of you know who you are. All right, so the next thing we're gonna talk about is depression. So when I was in school, I learned that if you had depression, you were more likely to get cancer. So if you didn't have anything to be depressed about in the first place, now you do, you've got cancer. Okay? So we now know that that's absolutely not true, that when you're depressed, you're more likely to get cancer, and that your cancer doesn't progress any faster. Okay? However, we do have a very strong link between depression and heart disease, which is interesting because we say depression is a broken heart, right? And depression is very much linked to heart disease. So a person who has depression is anywhere between 2 to 6 times more likely to die of a heart attack in the next year and a half than a person who doesn't have depression. Okay, so let's say this side of the room, sorry, but y'all are all depressed, okay? And this side of the room is not. Now, I've matched you, so you're about the same ages, and you have the same kind of health issues and so forth. Genders are spread evenly and so forth. Now, for every one person here, sorry, the man, who dies of a heart attack in the group that's not depressed, okay, anywhere from 2 to 6 people will die of a heart attack in that group for every one that dies over here. That's huge. You see that? That's a really big correlation there, really strong correlation and a pretty scary statistic. Now that doesn't mean that if you have depression or if you have a heart attack, you're depressed. In fact, only 30% of people who have heart attacks are depressed. Okay, so we're going to talk now about coping with stress. And the first thing we're going to talk about is a psychological characteristic, a personality characteristic. Called psychological hardiness. Cabasa in the 70s came up with this idea that there are some people who seem to be resilient. No matter what, they come out smelling like a rose, no matter how much stress they got. And he called these things he found in these people the 3 C's. He found that they were more likely to feel in control of their lives, that they were committed to some personal goals for themselves, and that they saw change as a challenge. Okay? Problem versus emotion-focused coping. When you have a problem, you can try to deal with the problem by changing the problem itself, or by changing your feelings and thoughts and how you let that problem get to you emotionally. So it's better if you can do both. Now, so let's say you have a bad boss, right? You can just change the problem and say, okay, I'm going to change departments, or I'm going to quit and go to a different job, or whatever. Or you could just use emotion-focused coping and saying, you know what, I'm not going to let their personality issues affect me and not take it personally when they do certain things. Or you could do both. You could say, I'm going to try to switch, and then I'm also going to remember that that wasn't about me, okay? So it's always better to do both if you can. Resources for effective coping. The healthier you are and the more energy you have, the better off you'll be. Because, for example, as you're going through the general adaptation syndrome, you will stay in resistance longer because you're healthier and in better shape. Positive beliefs. This is important. People who are optimists versus pessimists. So when people have good self-esteem, they tend to be less anxious. Stress makes them less anxious. And people who are hopeful, that gets them through some hard times as well. Now, you know what an optimist is, right? They see the glasses half full. They have the positive view of things. And a pessimist is a negative view, or they see the glass is half empty. And the researchers found that optimists live longer than pessimists. And they're not sure why, but I'm pretty sure it's to annoy the hell out of us pessimists. But anyway, they survive longer after they've had a heart attack, optimists do. When their cancer comes back, if they're after heart surgery, or when they're trying to recover from a surgery, and also when they're living with AIDS. Now, it could be because they have internal locus of control. We're going to talk about this in a moment, but what that means is that they feel in control of their lives. It could be because they have a lot of social support, because they're so damn pleasant to be around, right? Optimists are. And also, it could be due to the fact that they're more hopeful. Being optimistic, they are more hopeful. Okay, so social skills are interesting. Nobody talks about social skills until somebody's lacking social skills, right? That always cracks me up. It's like nobody ever says the word social skills until somebody comes along and they stand too close to you, or they talk weird and out of turn, or something is odd about them, right? And social skills are important because social support is the most important thing that helps you to deal with stress. And so what the social skills are there, and they're actually going to allow you to have more social support because you know how to make friends. And also social skills can get you out of trouble. Like, you know, there are people who don't have the skills that when they bump into somebody, they're gonna take a punch because these people don't, you know, they don't know how to say, oh, I'm sorry, or in the right tone or in the right way, or make up for it and so forth. All right, so social support is the one most important thing that you can have that will help you to deal with stress. It is the most important thing. And social support means you have people that you can talk to and share things with. It offsets major life events, and it promotes longevity, which means you live longer when you have social support. They've done research, and it says that if you have someone with you when you're trying to get over an illness or a surgery, it helps to have people with you. You get better than people who are alone. And it could be your spouse, it could be a friend, it could be a stranger. It could be a pet or an animal that's not even your pet. And they've done research to see if it matters if you like your spouse. If it's your spouse, does it help more if you like them or you don't? And it helps if you like your spouse. It helps if they're the one that are going to sit by you. If you have a bad relationship with your spouse and they're the one that's going to sit by you, it's not as helpful. Having a confidant means having someone you can really talk to and share anything with. And this is related to physical health. And that is especially so for men. The relationship between having a confidant and health is so strong for men that a man who has no one to talk to might as well be a smoker. That's how bad it is. And we know that smoking is related to every bad thing, right? Well, a guy who has no one to talk to is as bad off as if he were a smoker. So why is it so important, especially for guys? Well, let me tell you why. Here's my thought on this. Women tend to have friendships based on sharing. And a woman might be here, let's say in the United States, all by herself as a student. And she might have family or friends, even one friend across the continent, across the world, that she talks to. And she'll talk to her probably every day if she can. And they will share. And she will share her feelings with that person. And she will be in better shape than a man who might have 12 friends, but not one of those can he really, really talk to. Because men's friendships tend to be activity-based, right? So we may have a bunch of friends, but these are the guys I play poker with, and these are the guys in the band, and these are the guys I play basketball with, and that's it, right? None of them would I be able to really share with without feeling vulnerable. So that's a big issue. Okay, material possessions. Money is good. I'll make sure you know I told you that first before anybody else did, or you figured it out on your own, right? Money is good. It gives you options that you don't have when you don't have money. So when you feel like I might have to kill my kids today, you can do something and get a babysitter if you have the money. And also if you have the emotional support. You may not need the money if you have the social support to do that. So the kids get to live and you get to stay out of jail, right? All right, personal control. So personal control is called locus of control. And this refers to what do you think, where do you think, I should say, control comes from? Who's in charge of what happens in your life? There are two extremes, internal and external. Most people are in between. Some may be closer to internal or closer to external or so forth. But internal locus of control means that you feel in control of your life. You personally are in control. It's about you. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Anything I want to do, I can get done. It's all about you, okay? External locus of control on the other extreme is it's not me, it's God, fate, chance, luck, destiny, whatever, okay? And most people are not one or the other completely, right? They're somewhere in between. In countries like America and in the Sweden and Holland and places like that, we have more internal locus of control. Also, Asians tend to have more internal locus of control. Much of the world is much more external. So I said rest of the world here because I was being funny. But Hispanic, blacks, and African Americans, actual Africans, Middle Easterners, some places in Europe, the Latin countries tend to be more externally controlled. Okay? So this means that they look at, like for example, let me just give you myself as an example. So I got my doctorate when I was 25, okay? And so when my students heard me say that I was externally controlled, one student a few semesters ago asked me, how can you say you're externally controlled if you got your doctorate at 25? Well, being external locus of control doesn't mean I lay on the floor, open my mouth, and hopefully God will throw a sandwich in there so I can survive, okay? It's not about that. It's about how I look at my own successes and what it takes to get there. So when I have never looked at one of you and gone, what the hell are you doing here at 25? I had my doctorate. What is wrong with your ass? Never, ever, okay? On the contrary, when I see my own path and the path I didn't take, like for example, I don't have any children of my own, okay? Because I was set on that doctorate, and that's all I worried about. So I ended up getting married late, and we got divorced, and there you go. Okay, Bob's your uncle. So anyway, when I think about my doctorate and getting that at 25, achieving that, I think about everything that happened in my life that allowed me to do that. Not just me, but of course I worked hard, but everything around that. And then I also think about the things that are bad that did not happen. Like for example, one time I had a kid who was 21 or 22 in here, and she had gone to A&M and started there, and then she had a stroke. And so after some time of recovering, she was trying to get back into school, and she thought, well, I better start small at community college and make sure that I can take the pace of A&M, right? Not just academic pace, but literally the physical pace, right? So that could have happened to me. And I never think, oh, I've got my doctorate because I'm better than you. I think things lined up in a way that that's what I got. And other things that other people did, I didn't get to experience that because I was doing something else. Every time we take one path, we're leaving many others behind. So locus of control is how you view things. Now, internal locus of control tends to be healthier. Let me tell you why. When these people with internal locus of control, when they get up in the morning and they're having a good day, and they look in the mirror and they go, damn, I'm good looking today, and I am going to have me a good day. They're the kind of people who, no matter what happens, it doesn't seem to take them off that path. But people with external locus of control, we tend to be more kind of affected by what happens. So I can get up and feel good, and if something happens, and all of a sudden I tend to be more affected by that sometimes than people with internal. Okay? All right. Internal control still makes me laugh though, because we're all, I remember one time I visited a crater in Arizona, and it's this huge crater where this thing landed. What do you call it? Meteor? Okay. Okay, so huge, okay? So I'm standing on one end of the crater and you can't see it, but you can use these binoculars to look, and way over there you see in the binocular, you see, or telescope, I can't remember what it was, a house. It's tiny big, and it's a full-size 3-bedroom home in there, okay? And that's how big the crater is. That was halfway down the crater. And I'm thinking, at this time that I did that, I had just taught this lecture, and I remember laughing and laughing. People all sitting there thinking they got all kinds of control, and this meteor comes and pulverizes their ass in a heartbeat, right? And to me, I'm just like, we just think we're in control, okay? But it doesn't mean that we're all one or the other. Usually we're in between. All right, so, whoa, what happened? Sorry, this thing went crazy. Okay, so active coping. It says here you should exercise. I don't know a damn thing about that, so I'm not the guy to ask. But apparently it's good for you. And it lessens your anxiety and depression and tension, especially if it's aerobic, which is the kind of exercise fat people are the most resistant to, including me. And because that's where you really sweat. Fat people don't like to sweat, okay? We do not like to sweat. So especially when it gets to where you're sweating on your upper lip, that's a seriously, watch yourself time. So if you're around a fat person and their upper lip is sweating, you want to smile and nod and just back up real slowly, okay?
Oh my God.
Because if I get to that point, bad things are happening, okay? All right, anyway, so it uses up stress hormones, it works tension out of the muscles, increases strength, flexibility, stamina, and cardiac efficiency. It almost makes it sound like a good thing, exercise. I can tell you all about relaxation now. There's a good thing for you right there. So you need to relax, and relaxing also means sleeping. You need to sleep. Sleep is very, very, very important to your health. And apparently so is good nutrition. Something else I know nothing about. Okay? Any questions?
Yes, the internal and external locus control. Could it be possible that somebody might have both or lacking both?
Okay, so the question is if you have internal or external locus of control, can you have both or can you be lacking it? Okay, here's how it is. It's a line, okay? So on one extreme it's internal and on one extreme it's external, and we're all somewhere on the line. So you might be very close to internal
Okay.
and not be so external at all, or you might be very close, or you might be right in the middle, okay? Any questions? Okay, thank you.